Right, joining us today is a wrestler who, for more than 20 years, has made professional wrestling. From production to publishing, from performance to podcasting, every piece of the puzzle, he has done it all. Mike Quackenbush, the master of 1,000 holds, is joining us today. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, Mike, this goes back a little bit. I remember in high school, I was at an independent show, probably one of my first ones, and I remember seeing you wrestling. This is probably around 1999, 98, 99-ish. It was probably when, the Attitude Era was going on. I didn't really go out to too many independent shows, but I went to my first independent show, and I discovered Mike Quackenbush. I became an instant fan. You guys were, you were working with guys like Reckless Youth and a lot of others. The stuff that you were doing, I wasn't really seeing too much of on TV, if you will, at that time. But do you have any fond memories, maybe of starting out, or maybe just wrestling back then in the 90s? Because, I mean, like I said, the first time I saw you, I became an instant fan.
Well, thanks for that. And the time period you're referring to, those are like my hard traveling years. The years that I wrestled the most number of matches per year. Maybe a couple of years that were between 100 and 150 matches in a year. Were 1998 and 1999 and into the early part of 2000 for me. Yeah, I was out there all over the place. A lot of times there were weekends where we jam in 2, 3, or even 4 if we could double shot on a Saturday. And Reckless Youth was my most frequent both traveling mate and in-ring opponent. There were times when, we would shoot up to Northeast Wrestling up in Connecticut. We'd come right back down, hit a couple Jersey independents, cross over into PA. Sometimes we would not even get out of our gear. If we had 2 performances on the exact same day, we'd do the afternoon one, stay in our gear, and just drive to the next commitment that we had. So more than once, we would show up well warmed up and already dressed at our evening appearance. So I don't miss the hectic pace of that, but yeah, I do have a lot of very fond memories, and especially being up in Connecticut back then when I worked with Mike O'Brien's Northeast Wrestling, a lot of really fond memories. The first time I was ever in a locker room with Jerry Lawler, getting to just kind of overhear him telling stories about Andy Kaufman was thrilling to me as a devotee of Kaufman's. He is one of only 2 wrestlers, by the way, to ever introduce himself to me using like his ring name. He shook my hand and said, "Hi, the King." And I thought, I was like, "Hi, I'm Mike." And then the only other guy who ever did that to me, he just did it to me over the weekend. I was down in Annandale, Virginia, teaching at Nova Pro Wrestling. I did a seminar down there, and a guy walked up to me and shook my hand. He said, "Hi, I'm the Urban Legend." And I was like, "What?
I love it."
Are you a chupacabra? What do you mean you're the Urban Legend? What does that mean? But that made me think about Jerry Lawler and being up there for Northeast Wrestling. And they really drew some wonderful crowds.
Oh, they still do. Yeah, they still do. Doing great. But yeah, like I said, you were probably one of the first. Like, I didn't go to too many shows. I mean, I was watching what was on TV from Monday Night Raw to whatever. And at that time, I wasn't really venturing out to too many independent shows. And I heard about this show, went to it, and the rest is history, if you will. But like I said, I became a fan of you then. You had a great career, but within that time, you retired in 2013, but you're still busy as ever from what I see. I mean, you are the creator and owner of Chikara and also the training center, the Wrestling Factory. Can you tell us, though, a little bit about Chikara and maybe why every fan out there just needs to check it out if they haven't already?
Sure. If you've never ever heard of Chikara, it's the Japanese word for power or influence. And in the very planning phases of Chikara and our training facility, the Wrestle Factory as well, we often looked at Michinoku Pro as a blueprint. And Michinoku Pro, which is kind of quarantined up in the northeast corner of Japan, is an independent organization which still exists to this day, although I would argue that their golden period is from like 1995 to 1998 maybe. They had this wonderful fusion of styles. So they weren't just high-flying Japanese wrestlers. They also had influences from Europe and from Mexico. And from the United States as well. One of their top stars, Super Delphin, is an out-and-out fan of Randy Savage and Mr. Perfect. So there's all these wonderful ingredients that get mixed together to make this just like super tasty dish with Michinoku Pro. And not that you didn't see that some places here in the United States. Like I could point to WCW's Cruiserweight division in the late 90s as another place where you could look and kind of see this hybridization of styles. But that really excited my imagination. And I co-founded Chikara with Reckless Youth, even though he departed the company just 8 months into its existence. In the planning phases, in the initial planning phases, he was a big part of what could we accomplish? What could we do? Mm-hmm. And part of what characterized Tom's experience, Tom Carter being his name, was that he was fresh back from being in the WWF's developmental system for a little over a year. And he came back from that a really changed individual. In one way, I think they succeeded in beating his passion for wrestling out of him. So we really needed something that kind of like excited both of our imaginations, that made us feel inspired. And so that hybridization of in-ring wrestling styles you will certainly see at Chikara, and I take a great deal of pride in imparting that to every graduate of the Wrestle Factory. But in a larger sense, I would say our storytelling is most akin to if you grew up reading comic books, Silver Age and Bronze Age Marvel and DC comic books, or like if you're a fan right now of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there are more fantastical elements. We don't shy away from indulging in the supernatural or the paranormal or the superhuman type stuff. I like elements of fantasy or science fiction in my storytelling, and I feel like we have license to get away with that because we no longer must labor under this misimpression that fans don't understand the artifice of pro wrestling. Quite the contrary. Fans understand professional wrestling for what it is, and they love it for what it is. But this gives us a chance to really take all of it, the performance, the story, the characters, every element that makes up pro wrestling, and take it to a really far extreme. Now, sometimes, especially lately, I feel like we've been mischaracterized as like comedy wrestling. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's because we do have a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. Like that's true. And, like unlike some of the backstage vignettes you might watch on Monday Night Raw, our sense of humor is funny. But I don't think it's fair to say that we're comedy wrestling, even if we all happen to have a sense of humor. I think what we are is something other than that.
Sure. Now, I mean, even from wrestling and training, though, you've transitioned to training a lot, too. Do you enjoy training maybe now more than actual wrestling back in the day, or is it kind of like on an even level?
I certainly enjoy the teaching aspect of it, and it took me a long time to become a good teacher. When the Wrestle Factory opened, I think I was a lousy teacher. I didn't have much choice, though. When Tom resigned from the Wrestle Factory 8 months in, suddenly all the responsibilities were mine. The things that Tom, who outside of his life as a professional wrestler, he's a certified public accountant. Tom was always really good with the numbers and the budgeting and all that sort of stuff, which doesn't interest me, nor is it really my forte. He was also a very good teacher, and that was not my forte. So I had to learn to be a good teacher, and I do find it very rewarding. I enjoy being out there and traveling the world and being able to teach, whether it's in-ring mechanics. I certainly love my wacky submission holds and international styles. But a lot of times, like just this past weekend, I had every intention of kind of lacing up my shoes and getting in the ring. And instead, based on the suggestions of the people that attended the seminar, we just talked for 2 hours. We talked about all kinds of other elements that make up the performance. And I'm happy to do that, too.
No, definitely. Now, you also have a book out, 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, a book for fellow pro wrestlers. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe why you wrote this and what you think other wrestlers will get out of it?
Sure. I think I wrote it mostly for 2 reasons. One being the same types of topics or questions kept getting asked everywhere I went to teach. So it didn't matter if I was teaching here in North America or I went to another continent or wherever I went, there was like a universality to the kinds of questions I was being asked by whether they were rookies or intermediate level or really advanced seasoned pros that were attending my seminars. And I felt like there is a body of information no one's really talking about in professional wrestling. And I felt like when I was younger in professional wrestling, nobody ever talked to me about it. But there used to be a prevailing thought that maybe some of the veteran performers did not want to impart all of their knowledge to up-and-comers for fear that they would take their spot, right? There's always somebody younger, better looking, with crazier moves, a little more charismatic, a fuller head of hair, whatever, chasing right behind you. And if this guy knows all the tips and tricks that you know, then where's your job security? So there was this tendency, I think, on the part of the veterans to withhold really key bits of information that prevented the younger classes from becoming the best wrestlers they could be. And I kind of think that's bogus. So I wanted to kind of put all of that down. That was one main reason I wrote the book. The other was just by a weird scheduling snafu, all the people really important to me in my personal life were like on trips or vacations or going away for 6 days. And for the first time in years, I had 6 days to myself. And I thought, like, what am I going to do? I mean, I've got a really deep Netflix queue I could catch up on, like maybe that. But I used to write far more prolifically. I wrote for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, and that family of magazines for 10 years. So I have hundreds and hundreds of published articles there. And Seven Keys is my 8th book. But the majority of my books were written between 2000 and 2010. So quite a number of years had gone by without me really publishing anything, because the majority of the writing I do now is just, it's not for public consumption. And all these things together kind of motivated me to want to write that. My hope is that if a professional wrestler reads this book, even just one chapter of it, there will be information in there that they can immediately incorporate into a performance they might have later that same day. It's not stuff that needs to go into the oven and bake and bake and bake. Now, some of them are. However, there's lots of immediately actionable items in the book, ways to take your performance up a notch or two. And that also informed the companion podcast I made for the book. It was called Kayfabe 2.0.
Nice. Now, with all these books, I mean, do you find... sometimes it's usually hard to convey what's in your head onto paper. Was it natural for you becoming an author too, just with all this wrestling knowledge, just to be able to convey to all the fans and wrestlers out there?
Sort of. I think over the years I've gotten better at expressing it. I've had a couple opportunities in recent years to do public speaking engagements, and sometimes when I do these, for example, I gave a TED Talk-like speech a couple years ago at a conference called Ignite Philly. And I had been advised in advance, they said, you will have precisely 5 minutes. Like at the 5-minute, 10-second mark, they just darken the stage. So everything you want to say, you better be able to get it out clearly and concisely and do it all in 5 minutes. But having those kinds of challenges has forced me to kind of bring a concision to the way that I communicate. And it's got to be very effective. You might not hold the attention of a crowd for more than a moment or two, so you better be able to make your point pretty clearly.
Definitely. Now, aside from, like I said, I saw you in the 90s. You've wrestled into the 2000s, whatever you want to call it. Now, there was a different time back then to where for me, it was tape trading. A lot of us were getting VHS tapes of different wrestling shows, watching it when we could. Or if we were lucky enough to be in whatever region, we'd see it on TV. But nowadays, social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot, how has that probably helped you or just helped your company, Chikara, or just, wrestling in general, do you think, of how, accessible it is today as opposed to what it was back then? I mean, is the world we live in, what I'm trying to get to, just good for pro wrestling?
Well, Chikara could not exist before the ubiquity of the internet. It just would not be possible. There were far fewer independent wrestling organizations before the proliferation of the internet. You have this vast resource in which you have the ability to connect with fans that might like your particular flavor of wrestling. And before the internet, I think back to those shows, right? I started performing in 1994. This kind of predates the ubiquity of the internet. I am well acquainted with the old-timey tradition of, a van of guys with staple guns and these carnival-style posters that are like pink on the top and yellow in the middle and blue on the bottom with names printed on them. You drive through a town stapling these to phone poles in the hopes that in 3 weeks people turn up at the wrestling card. And as a method of marketing these days, one, that's not particularly effective anymore, right? It seems kind of quaint to even reference that. Beyond which, little pointer for you if you're listening, some towns fine you for doing that.
Wow.
Because that happened to us once. We were fined $20 for every poster we had stapled to a phone pole, and we had to like drive back through the town, taking them all down within 48 hours.
Oh man.
Right, good learning experience for us. We were like, let's not do that ever again. So yeah, it's really just completely changed the way in which you connect with an audience, and especially what we make at Chikara. I am well aware our flavor of wrestling is not for everyone, right? Like you might need to have a kind of wink-winky subversive sense of humor. You might need to like superhero tropes a little bit more than the average wrestling fan for Chikara to be up your alley, and we would not be able to find a sustainable audience without the tool that is the internet. We're fortunate in that we're able to connect with fans everywhere. And this is top of mind for me is we were just packing up merchandise. Like, here goes a box of our stuff to Japan. How on earth in 1993 would that fan have even known we existed? Maybe only, like the ways that were available to us back then. I would every once and again get like a newsletter or catalog type thing in the mail with tapes I could order if I wanted to. But in no way, shape, or form did that contain the kind of compelling multimedia that you could embed right now into a tweet. Right, I can embed a 2-minute and 20-second video into a tweet, an animated GIF, a high-resolution photograph. It seems so completely antiquated, but yet I remember it very fondly when that new newsletter would turn up in my mailbox with the listing of all the goofy wrestling tapes that you could possibly order, just printed there in inky black and white, waiting to get all over your fingertips.
I'm a big fan of like tournaments, like King of the Ring, or where they have the Battle of Los Angeles. But you won the inaugural King of Trios. Can you tell us a little bit about this tournament? Maybe what makes it a little bit special and different than others?
Well, as we often tout, it is the biggest tournament in all of professional wrestling because 48 wrestlers come together to comprise 16 trios. And there was actually a tournament in the last year or so that was meant to happen in England, which would have been bigger. It was meant to have more than 48 wrestlers, but it was canceled. They didn't have it. And as someone who's been instrumental in organizing some King of Trios tournaments, I can tell you why, because it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare to get that many wrestlers all to do the same thing on the same day. So, yeah, that remains King of Trios sort of value statement, right? You're not going to find another tournament that's got 48 professional wrestlers in it. And the 11th one is, right around the corner. We just started unveiling the trios, as a matter of fact. The Nexus trio of Darren Young and Justin Gabriel and Michael Tarver was the first trio that we announced this year for King of Trios. And not even 24 hours ago, Abby Lath, recently released from NXT, returns as Princess Kimberly to Chikara to team with Los Ice Cream. So the second team has been revealed of the 16 trios for this massive 3-day tournament that we put together. And it's kind of grown into an experience. By that, I mean, we take over one venue for an entire weekend. There's all kinds of additional activities that you can attend, that you can participate in, like our fan conclave. If you want to sit and play video games against the wrestlers in the tournament, like that's the only place where that's going to happen. So it's kind of blossomed into this more robust, fully realized fan experience, which is super fun for us, but also super fun for the fans. And I'm pleased to see the way that it's kind of evolved, despite the fact as like a work-related project, it always looms like this impossibly large monster on the horizon. The actual weekend itself is generally like a joyous one that kind of reminds everybody what it is they love about this great art form.
Definitely. What else can maybe the fans expect this year from Chikara? Anything that we just don't know yet about? Maybe hinting at anything, or once again, too, for fans out there who maybe just don't. Well, I don't know, a lot of people who don't know about it, but maybe who are just being introduced to it for the first time. Where to find it, how to watch it, and all that other stuff.
Well, we put out a ton of free multimedia, especially on our YouTube channel. But if you wanted to dive into the video vault itself, you can get there's like at least a free week's trial that you'll get on Chikaratopia. Chikaratopia.com is our sort of proprietary Netflixy type service. So on there, not only will you find 800 hours of our past events going back all the way to season 1. We're currently in our 19th season. So there's plenty for you to browse there. But I would say, especially now there is no better time to try Chikaratopia for this reason. Every event from our home base, the Wrestle Factory in Philadelphia, will live stream on Chikaratopia. So there's something like 20 events this season that we're going to be live streaming, including this Saturday. This Saturday, the first stage of our Young Lions Cup tournament, our annual showcase for rookies, will be live streaming on Chikaratopia. So even if you can't make it to Philadelphia or you can't make it out to see us, at all during this year, well, we'll be as close as your pocket. Anywhere you can get the internet, you can stream Chikaratopia.
I've seen your wrestlers. I've seen the guys here and there, maybe certain events, I think at certain Comic-Cons and whatnot. I'll tell you what, it interests me beyond what I see out there today. And it's just like a totally different world of wrestling that everybody loves and should check out. I think just for listening to this, just please, I encourage everybody, chikarapro.com. You'll find all the links on there. But Mike, what else? Where can everybody else find your book, hear more about you, maybe even find anything else that they ever need to know about you?
A great place to start is my Twitter, at Mike Quackenbush. I'm always doing my best to get the word out there about all the various projects or where I'm teaching next. And my latest book, 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, a book for fellow pro wrestlers, is most easily obtained through Amazon.com. You can get it digitally delivered to your device within seconds. And if you got that sweet, sweet Amazon Prime, like a drone will drop it on your porch by tomorrow. So yeah, if that intrigues you at all, check that out. Please leave me a review. Or if you're not ready to take the plunge, as I said, there was a companion podcast, and it's certainly out there in the ether to live on forever thanks to the internet. It's called Kayfabe 2.0. It's very much about how modern wrestlers approach the challenge of engaging with how audiences are in 2000, as I recorded it, 17, now 2018. And that might give you some real insight into the type of content that's contained in the book, and it won't cost you a dime to check it out. Kayfabe 2.0. It's on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, anywhere fine podcasts are sold.
Oh, perfect. Well, Mike, I could talk to you all day. We'll definitely have you back on. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you giving me a platform to talk about the stuff I love.